David Gartenstein-Ross of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the man who has probably tracked American terrorists for longer and harder than just about anybody I know. And David has a new book called Bin Laden's Legacy While We're Still Losing the War on Terror. David, I wanted to ask you about Europe. What is going on when we have a British subject who is in London in broad daylight, takes a meat cleaver and hacks a British soldier to death in front of hundreds of bystanders? Is this the new wave of terror?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the bystanders. I mean, as you mentioned, they were simply standing there. A lot of them had their cameras out. They were filming. I mean, this is really disgusting, to be utterly frank about it. Now, to be fair, some of the bystanders were probably shocked. They were horrified. There were a couple of armed men, but you had this enormous crowd. There are a lot of things they could have done. You know, the crowd could have overpowered these two guys. They could have thrown things at them. They could have distracted them. That's highly problematic in and of itself. As to looking at the situation in Europe, in Britain, you've had, over the past decade, a large number of terrorist plots. Fortunately, the vast majority of them have been stopped. But the MI5 director, that is Britain's internal security agency, gave this rather remarkable speech several years ago in which she said that at any given time, you'll have about 30 different ongoing terrorist plots in Britain. One thing that's actually probably helped the British in terms of the scale of plots that they face is that a lot of the plots are large scale. People wanting to attack multiple nightclubs or use car bombs and the like. Now, what happened here, this broad daylight attack, very difficult to stop. I mean, it's also far less damage than some of the plots that we've seen, like plots to blow up multiple airplanes using liquid explosives, but it's very difficult to stop.
Well, then, if these are lone wolf terrorists, difficult to stop, what do you do about the fact that there's Boston, there's Fort Hood, there's now London, there's Paris, demonstrations? Do we just sit by and wait for this stuff to happen, David?
Well, no. I mean, sitting by and waiting for things to happen is clearly not an acceptable option. The British have been extremely vigilant about tackling their problem. They've made a great deal of arrests over the course of the past decade. As you well know, it's difficult to prevent every single attack. And if you go back to 2005, when the 7/7 attacks occurred in London, attacks against mass transit, if you'd said there wouldn't be another successful attack until 2013, that would be excellent news. Now, the thing that's a bit disturbing is twofold. One is we've seen a couple of copycat attacks, seemingly. One of them in France, where a soldier was stabbed in the neck. The individual who perpetrated that attack was just captured, early 20s, Muslim convert. You also had an attack in a British prison over the weekend. It hasn't gotten a whole lot of press, but British officials believe that this attack on one of the wardens at the prison was also inspired by this attack on the streets of London.
So when President Obama makes a speech saying the war on terror, in effect last week at the National Defense University, in effect saying the war on terror is over, we won it, bin Laden's dead, al-Qaeda core is finished, are you buying that?
No, but the reasons I disagree with his assessment of the threat environment are a bit different than what we've seen over the past few days in Britain and France. I mean, those are very small-scale attacks. If that's what we have to worry about, and that's the extent of it, then actually I think Obama's not wrong. If that's all we have, then the war on terror can be declared over. But look down in Africa, and you just had a large-scale attack against French interests in Niger, carried out by an individual named Mokhtar Belmokhtar, someone who was once part of al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, started his own splinter group, but proclaims his allegiance to al-Qaeda's senior leadership. You also have another phenomenon that's going on, particularly in post-transition states, states like Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya, in which groups that once were banned under the old regimes, those who share al-Qaeda's ideology, are now enjoying the greater freedoms that you have within those societies. I was just out in Tunisia last month doing field research out there on a group called Ansar al-Sharia Tunisia. It's a group that shares al-Qaeda's ideology very openly, and one thing that they realize is they have unprecedented opportunities to undertake dawah, which is Arabic for missionary work. They're not proselytizing to non-Muslims, rather they're trying to win other Muslims over to their cause, and they have enough resources at their disposal to also provide social services, the kind of things that can bolster their image. And they're very, very savvy about immediately posting their dawah events, their social service convoys onto Facebook, which magnifies their profile.
What's going on in the broader Syrian conflict, where we now seem to have 1,000 rebel groups? Some of them are Ansar and al-Sharia that are closely tied to Sunni extremist radical groups. Others are closely tied to Hezbollah and Shiite groups. Is this something that we think is going to spill out into the entire region?
Yeah, the first thing I would point out, though, is we started out by talking about Europe and what the situation is like in Europe. I just got back from spending 2 months living in the Netherlands, where I was on a fellowship at the International Center for Counter-Terrorism at The Hague. And the biggest issue by far with respect to counterterrorism when I was there was that a report had come out from Dutch authorities that 100 Dutch Muslims had gone over to Syria to fight in that conflict. It's a big concern when they come back home. Unlike the United States, in which often will prosecute people who go abroad to fight, either for giving material support to a terrorist group if they're joining a terrorist group, or else for violations of the Neutrality Act, you don't have the same sort of legal regime in Europe. I also went to Belgium, and you have similar figures in Belgium in terms of the number of people who went to Syria to fight. This is a big problem that Europe is going to be facing. You're going to have a lot of returnees, which is also going to change some of the dynamics on the ground in Europe. As to the situation in Syria, yes, when you look at the future of Syria, think of the worst thing you could imagine, and it's probably going to be 10 times worse than that. I mean, the situation on the ground is horrible now. You've had somewhere between 80,000 people killed in this conflict to perhaps over 100,000. Chemical weapons use would be the least of our concerns in terms of the large amount of people who've been slaughtered in this conflict. You have multiple groups fighting, and it's a situation that, to say it's dangerous would be a dramatic understatement.
David, I have one last question from one of our viewers who's written, and J.D. Lupin says, it seems that a lot of these plots are being launched from Indonesia and East Africa. Is that the new Nexus Point?
When you look at plots that have gone into Europe, I wouldn't describe Indonesia as being a big part of that. You've had a number of different jihadist plots that have emanated from Indonesia, but most of them have been confined to Southeast Asia. When you look at East Africa, though, particularly if you look at the Horn of Africa, that's a place which we have seen as a nexus point, not so much for international plots, although one of the individuals who took part in the slaying of the British soldier had gone to Kenya. He was arrested by Kenyan authorities allegedly for trying to enter Somalia to join the group Shabab there. So often you have a great deal of nexus between one region and another. Not only do we live in an increasingly globalized world where it's easy for one person from a certain region to travel to another country or receive training in a third country, but also you have a jihadist movement which has a strong international identity. Right,
and doesn't know national borders. Well, I think that even though we have entered the summer months and a lot of people think about going to the beach and going on vacation, it doesn't sound to me like Islamic extremist terrorists and guys who want to do bad things are on vacation at all. Hey, thanks a lot for